You are listening to Tom's Hirschsprung's podcast, where I provide a look into the remarkable experiences of the most inspiring people around Hirschsprung's disease and sport. Hello, and welcome to episode 8 of Tom's Hirschsprung's podcast. This week I have another very special guest. I have Shellie Warner with me. Shellie is here to talk about her son, Donny. We are going to talk about his Hirschsprung's diagnosis along with Down syndrome diagnosis in episode 1. This will be a 2-part episode. So episode 1, we will talk initially about diagnosis, feelings and thoughts around that. And then episode 2, we will move on into the fantastic charity work that Shellie's been doing and some very exciting projects that she has coming up. Shellie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. I'll go straight into the first diagnosis. And I was wondering if you'd just like to share your story sort of from the beginning at 21 weeks and the initial diagnosis of Donny's Down syndrome, and then sort of take it from there.
Yeah, so I actually wasn't expecting the Adonis. He was a blessing and a disguise and a surprise and all of the above. But when we initially got his diagnosis of Down syndrome, everything just fell into place from there, really. We weren't expecting a baby at all. But the fact that we got Adonis was just, like I said, just a blessing. It's exactly what we needed. We initially had a low risk on our fetal testing for Down syndrome. And then at 21 weeks, they started measuring his legs and basically came back that he had short femurs. And from there, they said it could either be Down syndrome or it could be dwarfism. So then we had scans every single 3 weeks and then Dopplers every week. And it was a very intrusive process, to be honest. I was never alone in my pregnancy. Myself and my husband had a lot of decisions to make. And it was really scary having the questions that the doctors were asking us. They did ask us if we wanted to terminate. They asked us about 3 times because of his Down syndrome diagnosis. And we straight away were like, no, his name is Adonis. We have personalized his nursery. He's kicking me as you're asking me this question, saying no. So it was very intrusive and it was very scary, but we knew that God had chosen us to be his parents because we could handle it. During my pregnancy, when we were having all of our scans and everything every 3 weeks, they kept saying that my levels of amniotic fluid were rising quite quickly, and they shouldn't be. So from there, they basically said, we think he might have a bowel obstruction straight off the bat, but they couldn't see anything. So when he was born, I actually tried to have a natural birth, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best idea on my part, but with my first baby, I wanted the stereotypical water birth and everything. I wanted it to be completely natural and earth momish. So we ended up trying for a natural birth. It didn't work. His heart rate was dropping quite significantly. He wasn't taking any nutrients in the womb anymore. And his Down syndrome was the main factor in that. We knew that he had a small hole in his heart. He had an ASD. It has closed, but it had definitely had an effect in our pregnancy and in our decision making. So he was born anyway by emergency C-section because his heart rate dropped and they rushed me into surgery. And we were straight into the NICU to get oxygen. He had a CPAP on his nose and mouth to help him breathe. And they did say initially, he's definitely got Down syndrome. We did have a obviously low risk and then 99.9% chance of yes. But that 0.1%, we were kind of like, oh, maybe. But yeah, it was very obvious when he was born that he had Down syndrome, and he looked adorable. He was so cute as a button. And yeah, just happy baby. We went into the NICU, which is the neonatal intensive care unit. We were there for a month in total, but we were moved around hospitals quite a bit. So it was actually one of the nurses initially, when he was 2 days old, that noticed he hadn't passed any meconium. He hadn't been opening his bowels at all. And she basically said to the surgeons, look, I think he might have that bowel obstruction, and I think we should definitely look for it and look for an underlying cause. And we'd never even heard of Hirschsprungs at this point. It was so rare that I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what to expect. But nonetheless, we went and we moved into a different hospital that was specialised in pediatric surgery, because we knew that he'd have to get this obstruction removed. So when we arrived, I actually wasn't allowed to go with him in the ambulance, which was quite distressing anyway, because I just had my C-section. So he was whisked away to a different hospital, and I was like, what is going on? The start of my journey has been ruined. Like, what is happening? And they ended up doing some biopsies. They took 11 samples of his bowel in total across 3 different times that he needed a biopsy, because everything kept coming back inconclusive. So they weren't actually able to distinguish and 100% say, yes, it's Hirschsprung's, until the final sample was taken. And that was hard because he kept having to go through these biopsies awake. He was only 5 pound 6, so he was not big at all, and they were constantly doing tests and all sorts, and he must have been so scared. I mean, I was terrified, really. But they took the biopsies and it came back Hirschsprung's, and we were like, wow, okay, what does that mean? Literally, I had no idea. I'd never heard of it. I was just getting over the Down syndrome diagnosis, and then this has come forward, and I was like, wow, what does that mean for us? He ended up having to have washouts, so I had to do bowel washouts with him 3 times a day for 8 months, which was quite difficult with a wriggly baby newborn. We were in the NICU doing them initially, and then when we got discharged, it was a month later, and we were doing them at home, and it was just so, I think for us, being the positive people that we are, it was difficult, but we never let on that it was difficult. And the stoma care team who were supporting us in that, they were really impressed by the fact that I knew the pattern of his bowels quite quickly. I picked everything up, and they still to this day are like, I can't believe you're not medical. But I kind of just did all my research, really got to know his bowels, which sounds really strange. But when you're inserting a catheter, you just know where everything is and where to go and the angle to go in at. And he still has to have those to this day. The aim initially was to get his weight up and packing the calories. We have a dietitian to help us with that, and they are amazing. So that he would get big enough to have a pull-through surgery. They still didn't know what kind of Hirschsprungs he had at this point. He was 8 months old. They were putting off the surgery a lot because he was still having reflux. He never really ate more than 4 ounces of milk without throwing up. There was something wrong with his bowels and everything, and they thought that they'd got rid of this obstruction, but they actually hadn't. It was still there, and it had caused him to have enterocolitis quite severely. So we went back into hospital. We were in and out of hospital for months and months and months. He'd had this infection, constantly on antibiotics, and we just had no idea where the end was, like we couldn't see the end. We couldn't see how this was going to get better. They always say that the first year is the worst year, but this was really tough. So we went in for our pull through, expecting all to be okay. They still had no plan. They just went in blind, to be honest. It was a very strange way of doing it, but it worked because we just couldn't figure out where the part was, because we didn't know whether it was short segment or long segment at that time. And we didn't know how much of his bowel he was going to lose. It turned out that during the surgery, it was actually 12 hours long, the actual initial pull-through surgery. They couldn't do the pull-through. They took biopsies from all around his large intestine and his small intestine. And he came back that he had total colonic Hirschsprungs, which was quite a rare, as far as I understand anyway, a rare variation of Hirschsprungs. Most of them are short segment or long segment. And he struggled to be able to do the pull-through, the surgeon. So we ended up having an ileostomy formed, and he still rocks that to this day. And he still does have his large intestine, but he has not got use of it. So the whole of his large intestine and 15 centimeters of his small intestine was without nerves and unusable. So I'm not surprised that our washouts had to be 3 times a day for 8 months, and that he was constantly in pain with his food, because he literally couldn't process anything, and he was really, really struggling. So yeah, that's where we're at the moment. He's got his ileostomy, and he's eating 3 meals a day, 2 snacks, milk, eating out of house and home, really. But he is so much better now, and it's just such a long journey. We finally got to the end, really.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Just picking up on that about food and appetite, how has his appetite changed over time?
I mean, with the Down syndrome anyway, there's a lot of behavioural characteristics that need to be taken into account. But as far as his Hirschsprungs is concerned, it did have an effect on his appetite for a long time. He really had an unhealthy relationship with food. We were trying to wean him as normally you would at 6 months old. And he was just having none of it. He was so full and so in pain with his Hirschsprungs. And we just couldn't tell, because it had been like that since the day he was born. So it was really hard to know what his normal was. As I was saying before, he really didn't drink more than 4 ounces. I was breastfeeding at the time, and I had a massive oversupply. It was hard to establish breastfeeding anyway with the Down syndrome, because he had a short gag reflex, and he was really struggling with his swallowing. But when we got that out of the way, it just seemed like 101 problems all at once. And like I say, it was just never ending. But over time, he got used to the textures and he got used to the volume. Now he eats more than me. It's crazy, because he has his ileostomy. All the food that he eats just comes straight back out again. And we have to try and slow his eating down and slow his bowels down with different medications and a high fiber diet and everything. But he really does eat so much. He's a little gannet. And it only really changed in the last sort of few months.
That's a really important point. I want to pick up on something you said before, where you said, oh, there's 101 problems, and suddenly you overcome one, and then there's another, and then you overcome one, and there's another, or another one comes back, or whatever it might be. And sometimes it can possibly feel that you can't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
Like, having spoken to quite a few parents and people with Hirschsprungs about that, is there any sort of advice that you'd taken, or any thoughts that you think when you couldn't quite see the light at the end of the tunnel, that you would possibly give to other people?
I would probably say get yourself a positive husband, because I needed that positivity in my life. And when I was saying to everyone, like, oh, I'm really frustrated, I can't see the end of this, it's really hard, I can't do it, I can't do pre-washouts every day, it's controlling our lives. I mean, I had to leave my job because of how much care he was actually needing. And my partner worked nights, so he was sleeping all day. So I was pretty much on my own at the time. And it was really hard. But because my partner is so positive, he was like, he might be the 0.01%. Don't worry, it's fine. We're gonna get through this, and we're gonna do it, and we're a good team, and God believes in us. And he was very much the spurring factor and the thing that just kept me going. Also, Donny is such a trooper. Like, you just don't know, these kids with Hirschsprungs and with Down syndrome, they just get on with it. And I was just thinking to myself every day, like, if Adonis can do this, then I need to be able to do this too. He is so tiny and has no life experience, and he's just smiling. Every day he wakes up happy. And if that's the case, I'm doing something right. And there is an out. The first year is the worst year, which is what another mum told me. And it really is true. But it all works out in the end. And you just got to try and have some faith.
Definitely. No, definitely. Fantastic. And if people do want to see a lot of positivity, there's a lot of positivity on your Instagram page as well. Where can people find that Instagram page?
So we are at Discovering Adonis.
Lovely. And there's an awful lot of positivity there. A lot of really interesting medical info, but mainly from what I got from that was that you, your husband, and Adonis are just such positive people.
Yeah, we try to be.
And I think that's if anybody wants just some really uplifting, if anybody going through similar situations, or even not, if you just want some uplifting content, there's some great stuff on there. I've seen that you've put a few pictures and videos of Donny on there about he's very much into his music. Is that right? And
he loves music. He has a little piano in his playpen that he's just going at every time. He actually got out of hospital after his 12-hour surgery and came back and was straight on the piano on his tummy, rolling around like nothing had happened. And I was like, what is going on? If an adult had a 12-hour surgery on their stomach, they'd be in bed for weeks. They'd be properly milking it. But he was rolling around the playpen straight out of hospital, laughing like nothing had happened, and he hadn't lost all of his bowel. He had no idea what had gone on. But he's just such a positive soul, and he really gets that from my husband. I think my pregnancy and the whole journey that we've had has just been completely like it's like a film. It's like music. It really is just so positive, and it has leaps and bounds, but we got through it. And I think if I can help any other parents going through the similar situation than I was, then I will have done something right on this earth. So yeah, if anyone is in need of some advice, I'm always open. I'm constantly on the Facebook groups, like giving advice where I can and trying to help people, and same on my Instagram as well. And we do regular Q&As on there. So yeah, if you need some help, then just message. I mean, it was actually another mum who I got in contact when Donny was born, who had a son with Hirschsprung's disease and Down syndrome, and I am forever thankful for the advice that she gave me. And that was just through Instagram. I've never actually met this mum, but she gave us a lot of advice, and her son is thriving. I think he's 7 now, and he really is just such a positive person that I really fed into that and decided to do something similar with Adonis. So yeah, that's why we originally started our Instagram page, and I'm so thankful to her.
Yeah, definitely. I know just sort of personally that I know my diagnosis was about 30 years ago, and my mom would have really appreciated. She said to me before that she would have really appreciated, Instagram being around 30 years ago, but it wasn't, or Facebook or Twitter or any kind of social media, and you just sort of had to, I didn't know anybody growing up, who had Hirschsprung disease. I was just the only person who had it. So to make contact with yourself and with several other people around the world who got Hirschsprung's or who've had experience of Hirschsprung's has been fantastic. Just lastly in this episode, I just want to you highlight how important and how great the nurses have been, or the hospitals. How have they been? Obviously, nurses have looked after you wonderfully, but in particular, what have they done for you and Adonis?
I mean, it was a nurse that originally noticed his tummy distension at 2 days old. So that was really the start of our whole journey, was because a nurse was noticing that unusual factor, and I didn't notice it. His dad didn't notice it. I just thought it was his normal. The doctors that came round and did his original assessments didn't notice it. They did a whole head to toe test on him, and nobody noticed that his tummy was distended, apart from this nurse on the night shift who was probably so tired and so caffeinated that she just randomly came across him, and that was really the start of it. But because of her referral and her confidence to speak up and say, look, this doesn't look right, let me get a surgeon, that's the reason why it was caught so quickly. And we were able to be transferred to a specialist hospital and have the amazing surgeons that we do have at Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham, because we actually live down the road from there now because we need that support so often that we moved so close to it, so that it was always just on our doorstep, and we could always have the help. I mean, I probably call the stoma nurses probably twice a week, 3 times a week, just for some advice and support, and they've really become part of our journey. And the fact that it's the same team, I think, really helps us as well. They are just so friendly and so nice, and I've been sort of uneasy about asking so many questions before, but they've reassured me at every single turn point that no question is a bad question. No question should be kept in. And I should really feel like I can come to them with anything, and I really do feel like that. So I'm 100% on board, and have been nominating them for different awards and things as well. I've been going all above and beyond to make sure that they get the recognition that they need, and we're just so thankful.
Thank you. Yes. No, I thank you so much for sharing your story, and that's an excellent lead-in. As this is the end of part 1, an excellent lead-in to join us in part 2. And we talk about awards, we talk about charity work, and we talk about some really exciting activities. I'll call them activities that you're going to do very shortly. So, Shellie, thank you very much for part 1, and I'll see you part 2. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Find us on Instagram at Toms_Hirschsprungs_podcast. Listen to previous episodes on Spotify by searching Tom's Hirschsprungs Podcast.